think it's really important to focus on the fact that the US empire is the most armed country or entity in history, with ever increasing expenditures on warfare and militarization around the globe. Whoever possesses and uses powerful arms at scale becomes more powerful. According to a number of reports, at least $7 billion of weapons were abandoned when the US withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021. After the 20-year NATO occupation, those weapons fell into the hands of the Afghan Taliban, as well as different militant groups, including the BLA, the TTP, and even the Kachar in Pakistan. These 21st century weapons were manufactured by companies specialized in maximum kill capacity and mass surveillance. These technologies were experimented on in Afghanistan as well as Pakistan during the War on Terror period, which continues in a different way now, but that's a separate discussion. And these weapons have undoubtedly changed the nature and intensity of violence, both across the border as well as internally in the region. These weapons include automatic rifles or machine guns, which are actually banned in most countries. They also include pistols, drones, missiles, and armored vehicles. And the competing groups that are heavily armed and committed to carrying out attacks can do so with these weapons, in addition to using them for threats, extortion, and other purposes to strengthen their groups. So with this heavily armed array of various entities, the state actually can lose its monopoly on violence and provision of security, as we are seeing, and it puts the entire region at risk of further fragmentation and causing increased potential for murder and maiming of civilians and destabilization of day-to-day life. There's ample evidence regarding flowback of weapons from Afghanistan to Pakistan, and many American weapons that actually wound up in Afghanistan got there via the Karachi port and Pakistan supply routes used by NATO to facilitate the movement of their war supplies to the bases during the 20-year occupation. But the most obvious evidence that these weapons used by militants within Pakistan are coming back from Afghanistan now is the fact that the entire region was saturated with US weapons, which have serial numbers, they have QR codes, they have manufacturer names on them. Yes, the weapons, there are also locally made fakes that look like American weapons, because the American weapons go for a high rate on the market. And they're even stamped with QR codes and labels such as Springfield Armory, U.S. Marine Corps. But it's obvious that the U.S. didn't take back everything that was amassed over the 20 years of its occupation when fleeing in 2021. So we know the weapons are there. We know that residues of war always remain in battlegrounds and sites of bases following the operations, no matter how long the official war went on. The other thing is, the areas that are being targeted are near the Afghan border, most often far from the sea, in more landlocked areas. So it makes sense that those weapons are absolutely being used in the areas that have been destabilized or weakened and heavily armed through this process. Regarding tracking and containment, it is difficult to track or contain the spread of weapons, but there are ways of doing this, at least to an extent. Tracking the flow of weapons can start with engaging with weapons dealers who are operating openly in various markets, NATO markets being some of those markets and others, and they get a sense of who their suppliers are and their buyers are, so they would have some data and information on that. Mapping areas of the use of these weapons and known locations of these different powerful armed groups is another way to trace their flow. The more difficult part is containment, especially when you're dealing with something like weapons. But halting their supply would be a good start. Programs of demilitarizing is uh, is another way to do this, but it's a very difficult question. Yes, the U.S. injection of arms into the region already has created a long-term arms ecosystem, and in fact, it just builds on the arms ecosystem that was produced during the Afghan jihad and the war, the kind of proxy war with Russia in Afghanistan, where we see even to this day Kalashnikovs circulating, and all kinds of other war stuff, including tanks from that time period. So the circulation of war supplies and war materials is inevitable where there is war. And the question is, can you actually prevent the destabilization of the region by creating unity of purpose in defense of the nation, in defense of the region against external threats? If I think that's one way to move forward, but this is very, very difficult when dealing with different kinds of militancy, these smuggling networks, and destabilization, particularly in regions that have been occupied and terrorized for decades.